In 1750, a woman read the only instruction for dinner. Add butter the size of a walnut and flour until it feels right. No measuring cups, no thermometer, no cookbook. She tested her oven with her bare hand and cooked entire meals from memory. These are 20 dishes grandmothers made before recipes existed. They boiled bones for days and called it medicine. Long before anyone branded it a wellness trend, grandmothers on every continent were slow-simmering animal bones for hours, sometimes days. The nutritional researcher Weston A. Price found bone broth in every traditional culture he studied. A South American proverb claimed good broth could resurrect the dead. She judged it by the wobble. When the cooled broth jiggled like jelly, the collagen had released, no thermometer needed, just a woman tilting a bowl. This next dish was even more common, and it kept all of medieval Europe alive. They threw everything into one pot and called it pottage. Pottage fed entire civilizations for 1,000 years, and not one version was ever written down. A thick stew of grains, roots, herbs, and scraps of meat if the family could afford any. She watched the pot, tasted the broth, adjusted by instinct. A handful of barley, a few turnips from the cellar, whatever herbs grew near the door. Every pot tasted different because every day was different, and when autumn arrived, these women turned into chemists. They packed cabbage in salt and let it ferment for weeks. Sauerkraut predates written recipes by centuries. The process started in China roughly 2,000 years ago, where cabbage was preserved in rice wine. Romans adapted it using salt brine. A Ukrainian homesteader named Alyona recalled her grandmother making sauerkraut in massive wooden vessels in the root cellar, judging the salt entirely by taste. When Alyona tried to recreate it years later, every batch failed. She could not replicate what her grandmother's hands knew instinctively. But fermenting cabbage was the easy part. Keeping meat alive through winter was the real test. They smoked meat over fires they built themselves. Before refrigeration, smoking was one of the only ways to stop meat from rotting. In the American colonies, families ran smokehouses where pork and game hung for weeks over smoldering hardwood. According to Encyclopedia, during the early 1800s, families processed all their own poultry, beef, and pork at home. She knew which wood gave the best flavor and how long the smoking should last. Her nose was the timer, and if she got it wrong, the family went hungry in February. While meat cured in the smokehouse, something far simpler fed families every morning. They stirred cornmeal into hot water and called it hasty pudding. Hasty pudding started in medieval England as wheat flour boiled in milk. When settlers ran low on wheat in America, they swapped in cornmeal, borrowing from indigenous communities who made a dish called nassaup. Roger Williams documented nassaup in 1643 as corn beaten, boiled, and eaten with milk or butter. By the Revolution, this was daily survival food. Just a pot, a fire, and a woman who knew the exact moment the texture turned from runny to right. But if the family had a flat griddle, she could make something the whole house fought over. They slapped cornmeal batter on a griddle and made Johnny cakes. Johnny cakes swept through colonial New England because wheat was scarce and corn was everywhere. Cornmeal, water, sometimes salt, cooked on a griddle or board propped before the fire. In the South, the same batter went on the flat head of an iron hoe over coals, which is how hoe cakes got their name. George Washington reportedly loved these. She mixed the batter until it looked right and flipped the cake when the edges told her. No recipe survives because none was ever written. Now, if the family had flour and lard, she moved to something that could last for weeks. They wrapped meat in dough and baked it in the ashes. Meat pies were among the oldest cooked dishes in the Western world, and the crust was never meant to be eaten. It was called a coffin, a thick flour and water shell that preserved meat for weeks. She made the pastry by feel, mixing flour and fat with her hands until the dough felt right. Temperature came from managing coals around a Dutch oven in the hearth. But when there was no meat at all, the next dish kept the family alive on almost nothing. They boiled dried beans all day because meat was expensive. Baked beans became a staple across New England, but the dish is far older than the colonies. Native Americans cooked beans underground with maple syrup and bear fat for centuries before any European arrived. Puritan settlers adapted it with molasses and salt pork, baking the pot in dying oven heat on Saturday so it would be ready for Sunday, when religious law banned cooking. The beans soaked overnight. The molasses went in by taste. She knew they were done when a spoonful was held together. And from the same kitchen came the one thing no family in any century could survive without. They made bread without a single measurement. Bread fed more humans than any other food in history, and no woman ever used a measuring cup. Colonial bakers kept sourdough cultures alive, feeding the starter by feel. She judged the rise by poking the dough. She tested the oven by holding her hand inside and counting. According to historians at Old Sturbridge Village, women heated brick ovens by building fires inside, raked out the ashes, and slid loaves in on a wooden paddle. Done when the bottom sounded hollow, dull meant back it went. But bread was not the only thing she pulled from that oven. They baked pies with whatever fruit the season gave them. Fruit pies were controlled by the calendar. Summer meant berries, autumn meant apples, winter meant dried fruits from the pantry. The crust was always the same, flour rubbed with lard until it resembled coarse meal, then enough cold water to bind it. Sugar depended on how sweet the fruit tasted that year. Cold summer, tart berries, more sweetener. Hot summer, the opposite. She tasted the filling and adjusted. No two pies in the history of any household were ever the same. When the fruit ran out completely, there was still one dessert the family counted on. They made pudding in a cloth bag, boiled in water. Boiled pudding was one of the most common desserts in the English-speaking world for 300 years, and almost nobody alive today has tasted one. Before baking powder existed, puddings were wrapped in cloth and boiled for hours. The pudding cloth, invented in the early 1600s, freed cooks from using animal intestine casings. Christmas pudding was made this way for centuries. She tested it by pressing the surface and watching how fast it bounced back. Not every dish required hours, though. This next one took minutes and wasted nothing. They fried leftover mush into crispy cakes. The next morning, fried mush was born from a rule these women lived by. Nothing got thrown away. Leftover cornmeal mush from dinner was poured into a pan, cooled overnight, sliced and fried in bacon grease the next morning. She cut it a finger's width thick and fried it until the sizzle changed pitch, meaning the crust had formed. Golden outside, soft inside. Dinner became breakfast. Zero waste. That obsession with using everything gave birth to the next dish, too. They turned stale bread into an entire meal. Bread pudding exists in dozens of cultures for one reason. Bread was too valuable to throw away. In England, poor man's pudding. In France, pain perdu, literally lost bread. Stale bread soaked in milk, eggs, and whatever sweetener was available baked slowly in a cooling oven. She poured the custard by eye. No recipe, just the instinct to turn waste into something warm. But the next dish carries a history that runs far deeper than anyone expects. They cooked greens with whatever fat they had. In the American South, cooking greens was a tradition carried directly from West Africa across the Atlantic. Collard greens, turnip greens, whatever grew in the yard, slow cooked with salt pork until the leaves went tender and the cooking liquid, called pot liquor, turned rich enough to drink. The oral historian Andre Taylor documented that in African American households, these recipes passed down only through apprenticeship. Only the family members who proved their ability at the stove were ever trusted with the knowledge. While the greens simmered, the next dish was ready in minutes. They made dumplings from nothing but flour and water. Dumplings appear in almost every culture on earth. In colonial America, Quaker families ate boiled dumplings so often that outsiders started calling them Quaker food. Travelers in the 1700s described apple dumplings as an almost daily sight in the Delaware Valley. She dropped spoonfuls of dough into a bubbling stew and knew they were done when they floated. But if she had a chicken, the entire Sunday changed. They simmered a whole chicken until the meat fell off the bone. Chicken stew was a Sunday dish because chickens were more valuable alive, laying eggs, than dead on a plate. When a hen stopped producing, she went into the pot. The meat was tough, which meant hours of slow cooking over the hearth. She added whatever roots the season gave her and thickened the broth with flour. A fricassee version popular in the 1700s added cream and herbs, never a recipe, just a woman, a pot, and patience. And patience was the entire secret behind the next dish. They slow-cooked porridge overnight and ate it at dawn. Oat porridge sustained populations across Scotland, Ireland, and northern England for centuries. In many families, the porridge pot was never fully emptied. Fresh oats were added to remnants of the previous batch, creating a flavor that evolved day after day. Scottish grandmothers stirred with a wooden rod called a spurtle, always clockwise, because tradition said the other direction brought bad luck. The porridge was ready when she drew the spurtle across the surface, and the trail held for 3 seconds. In warmer regions, women brought something completely different across an ocean. They cooked rice the same way for 1,000 years. In Gullah communities along the South Carolina coast, the method for cooking rice came directly from West Africa, from the region between Senegal and Sierra Leone called the Rice Coast. A meal without rice was not a meal. She washed the grains by hand until the water ran clear. Water level was measured above the rice using her fingertip. The lid went on and never came off. She listened for the moment the bubbling stopped and the smell of toasting starch rose from the pot. And from those same kitchens came the most complex, unwritten dish in American history. They built gumbo layer by layer, without a written word. Gumbo combines West African okra, French roux technique, indigenous file powder from sassafras, and Caribbean influences in a single pot. Food historians trace it to Louisiana in the early 1700s, passed from cook to cook by demonstration alone. The roux was stirred until it reached the right color, a judgment call requiring years of experience, because 30 seconds too long meant a burned, bitter paste. She built gumbo in layers, adjusting seasoning by taste after every addition. And the number one dish on this list is the oldest cooked food in human history. They made stew, and it was different every single time. Stew predates written language, with evidence going back to 6000 BC. In colonial America, poor families ate from common stew pots filled with salt, pork, cabbage, corn, and whatever roots were in the cellar. Families kept the same pot simmering all week. Monday's stew had pork, by Wednesday, turnips, by Friday, dried beans. She never followed a recipe because the dish was never the same twice. The stew told its own story, and she was the only one who could read it. Every dish on this list was cooked by women who never owned a cookbook, women who measured flour with their palms, tested ovens with bare hands, and spent their lives over open flames in wool skirts with burn holes in the hem. If you have an older woman in your life who still cooks without measuring, ask her to teach you, not the ingredients, the feel, because once she is gone, that recipe disappears with her.